to Live with the Louhs with your hosts, Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne Lowe, where we will connect our Orthodox faith to day-to-day living and relationships to our family, our work, and our view of ourselves. Father Nicholas is the priest at St. John the Divine Greek Orthodox Church in Jacksonville, and Dr. Roxanne is a licensed clinical psychologist who uses her extensive training in private practice. Here now is Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Live with the Louhs. It's such a pleasure to have all of you with us this evening. We have been off for a few weeks, just taking some well-needed rest and relaxation, but so grateful to be back with you. I am Father Nicholas Lowe, and I'm joined by my lovely wife and co-host, Dr. Roxanne Lowe.
Hey, everyone. We're excited to be back. It feels like a really fast summer, doesn't it?
It does, and our kids are about ready to go back to school, but we are back in the swing of things on this Tuesday, August 8th, and we hope that you're having a blessed Dormition fasting season as we are in the sacred fasting season in the Orthodox Church. And if you're new to Live with the Louhs, one of the things that you should know is that it's a show that marries both faith and psychology to help give you some guiding principles that you can live by in your own walk of faith. So once again, we thank you so much for being with us. You know, before we dive into tonight's really important topic, I do want to encourage you that we're all on most of the social media platforms. We're on YouTube, we're on Instagram, Facebook, all under the headings of the Louhs, and that last name is spelled Louhs. In fact, all of our sermons, by the way, if you're interested, are archived on our YouTube channel at the Louhs. And we also send out a daily inspirational message. I'm sure many of you are already receiving them, but if you're looking for a daily word of encouragement, we encourage you to go to our website at thelouhs.com/subscribe. And all you have to do, friends, is just simply put in your email address, and every single day at 7 o'clock a.m. in your email inbox, you'll receive our daily word of encouragement. And listen, if you're already receiving them, do us a favor. Just help us to share Christ's light with people. You never know what people are going through, what type of word of encouragement they could benefit from. So do us a favor. There's a link on there that you can simply share it with your friends and family. So definitely do so. As always, we do encourage you to join the conversation. There's a number of ways that you can join it today. The show is being broadcast on this new platform where you get to see us and our guests, which we're really excited about. And what you may not know is that Ancient Faith recently moved into a brand new state-of-the-art studio, which is allowing us to do things that we probably never could have done in the past. So kudos to Ancient Faith, and really kudos to all of you for supporting Ancient Faith Ministries. But we would love to hear from you, especially on tonight's topic. Here's how you can call in. You can call us at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346. You can also listen to the show live on the YouTube channel of Ancient Faith. So go to youtube.com/Ancient Faiths Ministries, and you'll be able to watch us live as well. And you can also email us a question during the live broadcast of our show by emailing us at that's ASK at ancientfaith.com. Once again, it's 1-855-237-2346. So over the last year, if there's one topic that's really come up so often that we hear when we travel and do retreats or when we're speaking to people, it is the topic of addiction. So many people are struggling with this. And so it's something that is impacting, as you'll all know, many people that are in our nation and really throughout the world. And in fact, chances are that either you are battling an addiction right now or you know someone who is. In fact, this show is so great, such a major topic for us that we're not only dedicating tonight's show, but in 2 weeks from now, we're also going to have another show with Dr. Ioana Popa, who's going to be with us discussing this topic as well. But let me share with you some statistics that when I was reading them earlier today in preparation for the show were quite startling. Listen to this. Half of all people 12 and older have used illicit drugs at least once. Drug overdose deaths in the United States since 2000 are nearing one of its highest levels at over 700,000 people, and it's climbing closer to 1 million. 50,000 people, listen to that, 50,000 people die each year from opioid overdose. They represent 7 out of the 10 overdose deaths that we have in our nation. And over 10 million people right now are misusing opioid drugs because of an addiction. The federal budget for drug control in 2020 was $35 billion, and there's been a 61% increase in drug use for teenagers from 2006 to 2020. It's truly startling statistics. But if you're listening to my voice, not only is there someone that you know, or maybe yourself is struggling with an addiction, but for sure the family who are around them are dealing with an addiction too. I can't tell you how many people have come to us in our office, whether at the church or in Roxanne's practice as a psychologist, just simply begging and pleading for help for a loved one. Because for them, they've run out of all the ways to help them. I had one person recently tell me, Father Nicholas, we've tried everything, and we don't know what else to do. So tonight is a show dedicated to you. It is if you are dealing with an addiction, or more importantly, if you have a family member who's dealing with addiction and you're struggling with it, we want to dedicate this show to you. We brought on a very good and dear friend of ours, Dean Theophilis, who is a mental health therapist and addiction counselor. Let me tell you a little bit about him. For the past 10 years, he has worked in both Minnesota and Illinois, serving diverse populations as well as children, adolescents, and adults. He specializes in the treatment of addiction and trauma. He has clinical experience in both Christian-based and secular treatment centers, and he's also on the board of an extraordinary organization called the Orthodox Christian Association of Medicine, Psychology, and Religion, better known as OCAMPR, and he has been a speaker multiple times at their annual conference. He is currently working at Northland Therapy Center in St. Paul, Minnesota, and is a member of St. George Greek Orthodox Church in St. Paul, Minnesota. He's married to his lovely wife, Leanne, who is also a mental health therapist, and they have two sons named Theodoros and Nehemiah. Dean, thank you so much for being with us tonight, and especially to talk about this very important topic.
Thank you, Father. Thank you, Dr. Roxanne.
So let's get started. Dean,
Yep.
you know, there's so many different areas that we can approach this, but let's just start off by asking, what is the biological, psychological, and social and spiritual model of addiction? I think that would help our listeners understand that better.
Definitely. Yeah. So addiction is a powerful, powerful force. It's big. It's vast. You know, Father, when you were listing those statistics, I mean, I could feel the weight of how large addiction affects lives. It affects the individual, affects the community, affects the family. And the biopsychosocial spiritual model is a model that helps understand addiction by looking at how big it is. So as mental health professionals, addiction professionals, we try to approach when someone comes with an addiction issue, we're thinking about it as, okay, can we look at it at the biological level, the psychological level, the sociological level, and the spiritual level, as having that holistic, well-rounded, comprehensive approach to addressing this issue that, I mean, affects everything. I mean, it destroys things. It consumes things. I can go into more detail because every particular section evolves its own unique care. I mean, this is it can take time to address a singular area that gets affected by addiction. So in my work and when I've worked in inpatient facilities, you know, when a patient comes in, we're thinking, okay, what can we do in all those four areas to help them grow and heal and respond to this terrible disorder.
So, yeah, and I think that's a great, way to sort of dive in and sort of looking at just sort of the enormity of addiction. I'd kind of like to hone in on the aspect of the family for a little bit. Let's talk about how addiction specifically affects that domain. How does it affect the family?
Yeah, definitely. So certain models say that addiction is not just a disease of the mind, the body, the spirit, but also a disease of the family. So, in different therapeutic approaches, when it deals with family psychology, family counseling, we view family as a system. It's a structure. The family wants to structure and exist and work together.
Right.
When that structure goes awry or the structure is not functioning properly, that starts forming unhealthy behavioral patterns. And this can exist on a lot of different levels. I mean, the first one, there's always the very striking ones that there's definitely major hardship that the family's going through, whether it's poverty, family discourse, there's family abuse at home, there's family strife, fighting. I mean, all those factors are extra stressors on the individual that can help develop unhealthy coping patterns. And then there's more subtle realities of unhealthy family systems. There aren't good communication styles. There aren't good boundaries in place. I mean, a family's like a working machine. And if there's forms or functionings between family members that are not working well, that can start forming unhealthy coping patterns for an individual that develops an addictive behavior. So it doesn't mean, and again, it doesn't mean that like, okay, this is now, the family's only to blame or they're the only problem, but they had to be looked at, they had to be addressed in this and how to heal addiction, because, the individual needs connection. Addiction feeds off bad connection. So we want to form healthy new connections with that. So again, when a family's not connecting well, that helps form addiction and unhealthy coping patterns.
Yeah, I think some of the, real trickle down effects, I guess, that I'm seeing in relation to what you're sharing is just that sort of dysregulation of affect. I mean, there's just so much, emotional intensity that otherwise may not be there. And does that, emotional dysregulation precede the addiction, or is it a result of the addiction? Does it just become a vicious cycle? But everyone is affected by the emotional climate that sort of shifts by that, addiction. And so, kids being raised in that, partners not knowing what to do with that. That's sort of the trickle down effect that I see people struggling with the most, is just, what do we do with this bag of emotion that we see? We don't know when it's coming, if it's coming, when it comes, what do we do? And it creates just a lot of anxiety in people. So, I wanted to ask you, I had a question come in earlier from a man whose father was an addict, specifically struggled with alcoholism. And, the boys really learned how to kind of hold it and deal with it. And they kind of came to expect it, and they kind of, sort of figured out how to live with it. They adapted. But they adapted by sort of becoming smaller, so that the addiction kind of got bigger. And in time, Dad went to AA and sort of learned, to sort of own the addiction, work on the addiction, and work toward the recovery. But part of the Al-Anon meetings that the family then attended were about sort of recognizing that this is a disease, right? That this is not, Dad's, fault. And the kids kind of came out of it. And I want you to sort of talk about this AA and Al-Anon approach, because I think the kids kind of came out saying, hey, but like, it kind of feels like he's let off the hook in a really big way for all the pain and suffering. And, and so there was this sort of confusion, and I've seen that through families a lot in the AA and Al-Anon, approach to this sort of disease entity, which it is a disease entity. But I'd sort of love your feedback on that and your specific training and expertise on, what you would tell these adult children, who've kind of grown up and said, hey, yeah, it was kind of a big deal. And we can appreciate the disease model, but what do we do with that? Our large feelings about it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's funny. I remember even when I first years of working in the field, I worked in an inpatient facility. I remember the families coming in, and some of the families were just they were just carrying so much anguish and so much frustration. And that's, I think what I want to kind of honor in this too, in this space, is that, they carry so much, and it's easy, I can always say things and easy responses to this, but I want to honor your frustration, because this is difficult. And just saying, well, it's the disease model. And again, it is, that factor's a reality, but just to say that, not deny the frustration and issues with that, I think is denying the families and the children's individual pain with their struggle dealing with their loved ones' addiction issues. I look at it with the family model as that, and is that almost like there's a new member of the household, and that new member is the addiction. And, let's say you were a kid, you had mom and dad, but then you had like the third parent, or maybe you had the third child, or some uninvited relative.
That's interesting to put it like that. I like that.
Mm-hmm. And so I've used a dynamic with families, and when I do individual therapy, it's like, okay, now how are you going to relate to dad? And then how are you going to relate to this addiction? Because they're going to be very different dynamics. The way you're going to approach your father and communicate with him and interact with him. But then how are you going to interact with this other part that exists here that isn't going to listen to you at times? And to really flesh that out, that takes time to really understand, like, who am I talking to right now? Who am I engaging with? Am I engaging with my loved one, or am I engaging with that addiction? And of course, Dr. Roxanne, you mentioned, Al-Anon and Alateen. They really work on that reality in those support groups. You go to meetings and they talk about, okay, how have I been doing this week or this month? Have I really been engaging with my loved one in a really meaningful way? I've been showing myself with them, and how I've been engaging with that addiction part and saying my voice or saying needs to be done to make sure that doesn't flood back into my life. Because it's like a difficult juggling match sometimes to manage all these swirling emotions that come along with addiction in the family.
Dean, let me just kind of build on that. I think for a lot of people, when they're coming, especially with the families, I mean, I can imagine, I'm picturing in my mind, several families that have come to us, and, I think they're just at their wits' end. They've tried everything. There's levels of fatigue. Obviously, their own emotional health is in question as well, and there's just a total helplessness that they feel. If there's someone that's listening and tuning into our show this evening who's a parent, who's struggling, who's been trying their best to be the best parent they can be, and they're dealing with their own emotions of guilt and just helplessness, walk us through that. Help them to feel a little bit like that this is not so that
there's hope.
There's hope. Yeah. I think just give them that encouragement.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the concepts in Al-Anon is something called the 3 C's. It's a little, Al-Anon, AA, they all have these little sayings, these little quotes that are quick and short, but impactful. And the 3 C's are: you didn't cause the addiction, you can't control the addiction, you can't cure the addiction. And the first C, particularly the causing, is a big one. I can sit with hours with clients on the first C, and understanding how to really understand this, to actually find comfort in this, like you said, a helpless and powerless time. That guilt, because we love, and when we have guilt, it's out of the fact that we love this person. We feel at times responsible, or I love this person so much. What can I do to help change them? But you're reminded again, this is a new member. This addiction is a new entity. And this addiction at times is larger than just any one person. Mm-hmm. So this addiction is going to have its own mindset, own willpower. And to kind of acknowledge and kind of say, hey, I acknowledge my powerlessness, not in some defeatist way, but in a way this is a large entity. I can kind of let go of that extra guilt that I may hold on to, and realize that this addiction was formed out of so many different factors. And if I hold this extra guilt, this extra burden, that's all my fault, that I'm the major catalyst for all these terrible things, doesn't bring healing, and still this addiction still exists because it has its own functioning. And it doesn't mean we snap our fingers, we feel good all of a sudden, but at least we say, yeah, this is a large thing. And I need to kind of let go of control to some degrees. The second C shows, to realize that to face this addiction, I'm going to have to find new ways to maneuver that away from my family and find new ways to connect with my loved one. So that acknowledging that the bigness of the addiction, and that I didn't cause this big entity is huge. I probably would add one more thing with that too, is, this is every individual person's walk with addiction. I'd also hold this space as every individual's walk with Christ, with God. Healing comes with our own personal relationship with God and Christ. I love my children. I have 2 little ones, a 5-year-old and a 9-month-old, but I know it's their walk with God. I would love to pick up their crosses and help them heal. But I also realize that they got to pick up their own crosses as they get older. And, to kind of say hey, there is hope that God will come and there will be healing. But first you got to realize, what's your place in all of this? You got to allow healing to actually occur with that individual person's relationship with God and their individual relationship with the addiction. And then you work on your own healing and your own growth in the process. But as I said before, it's hard because we love so much. We want to do everything. We want to heal everything immediately. So we carry that extra guilt.
Yeah. And I think that's, so true, which you just sort of gave the analogy to, of sort of wanting to carry their cross for them, to do the work for them. And I think that's so often, what family members run into. And you mentioned, someone sort of realizing the enormity of it and the powerlessness, sometimes that they feel in trying to work, against the addiction. What about those who aren't quite there to even recognize that this is, in fact, a problem?
Right. That was what I was thinking. The same thing, Roxanne. It's like the opposite spectrum of just maybe even living in denial if that there is a problem.
Yeah, we're at that early stage.
Right.
Just trying to get someone to see it.
Yeah. Yeah. Denial's a big word, and there's an impulse in me sometimes. It's funny. I see families walk in, that are carrying the burden. They've seen the hearts of addictions. I see members walk into treatment and they're kind of oblivious. Like, what are you talking about? Things have been good. And there's a part of me that reacts, and that's like, what are you talking about? Your loved one's in treatment right now. How are you coming into our sessions being like, no, I don't see it right now. And that's, and I think that's important for why there's, in the addiction field, and especially if you go to meetings, support groups, they're very always good at evaluating. I mean, there are multiple ways to kind of check in to your life and see, what am I looking at? What am I looking in family systems to kind of take an evaluation of what's going on in the families? When the loved one comes into addiction treatment, we have screenings and assessments that evaluate the severity of the addictive behavior. But the same for families. Inpatient facilities have a family assessment checklist. They break down, okay, what's been going on in this part of the family? How's your communication been going? You see that pattern that's emerged? Now, again, even when we do those assessments and we kind of do an evaluation of how the family's been going, there's still that denial. I would honor that there's, it's always being mindful and patient with every individual. In many ways, we all have some form of denial to keep looking at. Mm-hmm. The hope is that, even if there is some forms of denial, I think sometimes with families, it's probably like a little bit half and half. Maybe they acknowledge some things that are wrong, but some things that are, they're still somewhat oblivious to. Okay, we'll start with the things that are difficult. We start with, the idea of maybe motivation for change. A family comes in and says, okay, well, maybe you're not fully aware of this pattern that needs to be altered. Can we work on this first? It's a gradual process, and patience is needed on the care professionals and treatment facilities ends to be aware of that. But it's, there's the other word in family psychology is that every family craves homeostasis. We really want systems that, everything looks good. And sometimes we force a system, a way of everything looking good at the expense of our own well-being. And that can go on for years. There's family members who come into Al-Anon to say, I found a love person with addiction, but then after a year in the program, I'm realized a list of my own issues that came up that I was not addressing for years. Yeah. It's tricky.
Yeah. You're listening to Live with the Louhs. We're so grateful that you're joining us tonight. We've dedicated this show to talking about addiction and the family, and we would love to hear from you. If you or someone that you know is struggling with an addiction, please feel free to call us. You can call us at 1-855-237-2346. Again, that's 1-855-237-2346. Now, you may want to be anonymous, and we totally will respect that. Simply just tell our producer when you call in that you simply want to remain anonymous, and we'll make sure that happens. I also encourage you to email us a question. We actually have some email questions that have come in, and Roxy, maybe you can get to those after this. And just simply email us a question. Ask, that's ask@ancientfaith.com. That's ask@ancientfaith.com.
And so just before we get to some of these email questions, I did kind of want to just piggyback on the denial piece, because I know this is sort of a big question that we contend with in folks, who are struggling. What would the disease model say to the abstinence model? That, hey, I've got this. I do drink, but I'm okay. I can control it. I don't need intervention. I don't need therapy. I don't need the help and the support of my partner who's bringing me in. Like, I've got this. What would you say to individuals who may be hearing that at home?
Yeah. There's an response from AA that starts with, what does it mean to kind of go to step one, admitting you're powerless over addiction, your life's become unmanageable. And there's actually some immediate responses. Sometimes family members, when it gets so severe that it may not be a dialogue may be more serious. There may be an interventionist need to come in to address the issue of addiction. And there's families who deal with addiction and loved ones that we've tried to communicate on our own, and there's so much resistance to that. We need to bring outside help, which again is a real option that can help. Actually, I want to mention if there's any emails or people come in asking for resources, I've been involved in Minnesota and in other parts of the country about addiction resources that can bring in kind of the more well-known treatment facilities and interventionists. That's a whole field of work done. So there's whatever gets that severe. Yes, we should always think about options of like bringing in additional help to kind of acknowledge, hey, there's some serious stuff going on. The severity of this stuff is risen to a level that we need significant help to find some level of normalcy. I'll say that those high levels, the reminder again too, I would be to tell families is that this, I kind of go back to the 3 C's again, to control and not cure it. If someone has this level of their own internal denial, it is not the family's place to try to fix their denial. It still is painful. It is still hard. It's still difficult. Actually, the reminder would be to go to a support group and kind of talk about, hey, this has been going on for a while. I've talked to my loved one. They're really not willing to listen. And of course, you can still be supportive and still express your concerns and say, hey, I love you and I understand you're not willing to talk to me yet, but here's a list of resources. Here's what I'm seeing. But I kind of remind families and loved ones who come in is that, don't keep trying to repeat the same thing over and over again and see the same results. And that at some form is a form of addiction where you just, we keep trying and trying. It's our 10th try, 20th try. They're not listening. Well, hold on. If they're not listening, then we got to find new avenues. And that may mean disengaging to help actually bring the point home of being like, we're done with this. I mean, I've advised families too, which is a hard thing we can talk about future on the hour is, setting serious boundaries, saying, hey, my loved one, my partner, I've talked to them for months, years, they're still drinking. Then we say, well, what about, you got to take a break. You got to leave, saying, I'm going to leave the house if I see, drugs or alcohol in the home. Again, those are serious levels, but I think the ongoing theme is that how can you keeping your own sanity, the loved person, as you deal with the denial that may be in the other person's, addiction complex?
Absolutely. Really a good boundary. I love that.
Once again, we invite you to call us at 1-855-237-2346 if you or someone that's just going through and struggling with an addiction, or you have a family member that is. We want to be here for you, and we're dedicated this show to doing just that. You can also email us a question at ask@ancientfaith.com. That's ask@ancientfaith.com. Dean, oftentimes when we talk about addiction, we tend to lean more into the drugs, the alcohol. But we have an emailer that emailed us something that I know is plaguing so much of our society right now, and maybe you could speak to it. And if not, we can definitely cover this in a different show with you on it. But this is the question. It said, youth are being exposed to porn at alarming younger ages via the internet and their social media. It is so pervasive and ubiquitous. They have to use these devices in their academic world. They are receiving negative images and unhealthy portrayal of intimacy. I would just add that we know that many of them are struggling with this addiction, this porn addiction. How could this be addressed? Even some of the protective apps can't screen everything if they choose to participate. I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on that, because that is something that is it just seems like it's a virus that is impacting every facet of our society.
Yeah, no, definitely. No, thank you for the email. And yeah, thank you for bringing this subject up, because it's also becoming very grave and serious. I actually would add what makes sexual addiction kind of uniquely kind of subtle is that sexual addiction can be hidden so well, especially pornography, with our phones, their apps, there's there are actually support groups, Pornography Anonymous, Sexaholics Anonymous, that address this idea of like the secrecy of how, sexual behaviors or sexual addictions kind of manifest. And so it makes it harder to confront sometimes because it will kind of almost add on to the denial. Well, this is tucked away. It's not a big issue. And, the initial thought again, too, to kind of help with this is keep communication open, keep talking, keep sharing. I mean, if we hold back to the initial model, this is a biopsychosocial spiritual issue. Well, a key piece of this is there's something that this behavior is holding, something that's not being shared, not being talked about. It's trying to heal something that's being wounded. And so the first way to start addressing maybe what's the wound behind that is to open communication. So with families, that's the thought of like, well, how well are we communicating? How well can we open better communication? And then can we instill that to our children? Is that, what does it mean to keep talking about these issues? Talk about your struggles and share, so that when maybe it comes time to be like, hey, yeah, I have been struggling with this, then we can bring in help. I mean, there are outstanding resources. Again, there's also amazing resources on Ancient Faith that address helping with sexual addiction and support groups, let alone treatment facilities that can help those dealing with sexual addictions. I would say the first step again too is how do we open up communication? Keep that process.
It's interesting that you speak about opening communication. An emailer has just written in previous to you answering this question that I wanted to ask why sex addiction is not an issue that is commonly and confidently addressed in the church, namely in sermons or talks. There seems to be a skew towards discussing substance abuse. How can we Orthodox parishioners disclose this issue to close friends in the church when it may not be understood?
Yeah, no, and it's interesting too, because especially, when you read, I think the lives of the saints, the lives of the Desert Fathers, the ascetical mothers and fathers, sex is a reality. A saint that I love very dearly, St. Mary of Egypt. Her struggle was sexual addiction. And I believe there were period times that there were groups being formed called St. Mary of Egypt groups around dealing with people, males and females, groups who struggle with sexual addiction. There's some degree maybe of fear. You open that world, there's probably a lot of vulnerable feelings, vulnerable emotions, maybe difficult things to talk about. I think, and Father, you've seen to the church really has a deep wellspring of knowledge and insights of like, hey, there are saints who dealt with this and they found healing. So yeah, I wish I remembered. I believe there was a few groups formed in the recent years on a St. Mary of Egypt group to help people come together to discuss this subject.
It's one of those things. It's one of those things, Dean, that if I was to put a hierarchy on the themes that I hear about through confession, I would say that pornography is definitely up there. That's for sure, and especially when we're dealing with adolescents, but even with adults. And I think there is a need for us to talk about that. The scriptures are filled with talking about the flesh and sexual morality and lust. These are all things that are so prevalent throughout the Bible and in the lives of the saints. But I do think that one of the things that we're living in such a hyper-sexualized society that, you if you're just scrolling through, your social media, profile, or sometimes just simply looking through social media, things are coming up at, that are becoming so a matter of fact. It's so normal now, to the point where children are thinking, well, what's the big deal? And I think that goes back to what we were talking about earlier with this denial, is that. I oftentimes tell people that whatever you have to do in secret is not good. Whatever you do in secret, most of the time is not good. And it's one of those things where you're challenging yourself to kind of say, to have that, we talk about this a lot in the church, of studying yourself, this nepsis, we say in Greek, this self-awareness of yourself, of knowing, okay, how much power is this truly having on me? Because we tend to sometimes... and maybe Roxanne, you and Dean get to speak about this, but we tend to kind of analyze our sin as opposed to recognizing And then when we analyze it, we tend to justify it. Like we can say, well, it's just like everyone's doing, or it's not a big deal, or, I'm not having an affair, kind of a, whatever that, the phrases that people tend to use with that. But I do think it's important to recognize that whatever we do in secret, most oftentimes is not good for us, and that we need to be very careful what we're allowing our eyes to see and our ears to hear, and the impact that it's having in our walk of faith. We should never underestimate the power that the enemy can use, even in something as what we're using right now, a computer, our iPhones, and social media as well.
I think that's so true. I do think we, justify, at times or rationalize away our sins. And I think there's that sort of other end where we have categorized our sins as so awful that we are so afraid to even think about it, imagine it, even admit it, acknowledge it. And so within ourselves. And so then the thought of having to then share that, with someone else is like, couldn't be farther from something out of reach, because we haven't even been able to hold it in acknowledgement ourselves. And I would say that sexual sin and pornography addictions seem to be harder for people to own or acknowledge than walking in and saying, I've struggled with alcohol, or gosh, I got on painkillers and now I'm stuck on them. It's, but I do think we have to remember, Dean, what you've said so beautifully is this sort of model that, helps us understand not only what the addiction is doing in the vast domains of our life, but that there is a disease model, something very much at work in our brain, which is an organ. It is fallen, and and we can have all sorts of broken methods with which we are set up to have to carry and deal with in this world. We all have something. And so to recognize that is not, hey, you're not a bad person, but there's this thing going on that if we don't kind of address it, can get worse. So that disease model is important to understand the biopsychosocial. There's just so many entities that do control it. So it's not necessarily like a choice that someone just woke up one day and said, I think I'm just going to add this third person to my home and to my marriage. But maybe you could talk a little bit about, the idea of being able to control or cure an addiction per se. Can we really control or cure? What does it mean? With addiction.
Thank you. I think that remind again, I love how you mentioned, Dr. Roxanne, just that idea of want to kind of judge and have a moral judgment at play, thinking, well, it's good or bad. I'm a good person or bad person if I can control things or not control things. And that's not how to approach addiction. It's actually going to lead to a lot more pain than actual help and healing. And again, as the addicted person and recovering person, I would say the person finding recovery realizes, I'm not a bad person. I have this addiction issue that's affecting my mind, body, soul. The family starts realizing, hey, we're not a bad family, that we haven't fixed or resolved this issue. Again, there's so much in AA and Al-Anon recovery about letting go of control. And the beauty of it is when you let go of control, you allow God to come in and God to really bring out his healing grace and power. So letting go of control is that, okay, we're examining our systems, we're breaking things down, we're realizing our systems haven't really been helping. We've tried to manage things and it's not working. We're going to shift realities. Letting go of control doesn't mean you become passive and say, oh, I'm done, I don't do anything anymore. Right. It says, no, we alter things. We're going to shift some realities. We're going to maybe work on things we weren't working on. We kind of go back to the family member coming in with denial. Okay, you're denying about these 5 things, but that one thing, let's work on this more. And then all of a sudden now I'm shifting new behaviors in the family. And with some families, letting go of control is literally saying, you got to allow your loved one to do this healing by themselves. They got to work on these issues. They got to carry their own cross. With other families, letting go of control, it's actually engaging more. It's saying, you know what, actually, you've actually been kind of too disengaged and kind of going out of your comfort zone to realize, no, you got to engage more with this loved one. Maybe this person has been hiding in secret their pain because they can't come and share with you. Letting go of control is actually, I know my position now in things, and I have to engage and talk to this person I love. I really want to stress that letting go of control does not mean I'm never going to engage with anyone ever again. It just means that, I'm reorienting myself to new ways of healing. things that I wasn't fully aware to. And then that curing piece again, too, and Father and Dr. Roxanne, again, you reminded again, families come in, they see the pain. There's a fear, desperation. They want so desperately to get things better. And I would really emphasize, when I work with Christian facilities, I really emphasize this point. Christ is the victor. Jesus Christ, Nika, he is the victor. He's going to come in. The resurrection will occur. God will bring in his grace and healing. And that is true. I've seen, I go to graduations and I've seen clients, with tears in their eyes, hugging their family members. That will occur. We got to allow God to do that work and not say, okay, now I'm going to manage everything. Your recovery, my healing, her healing. I'll work on my own individual journey, my own walk. That the letting go control process, I probably say it actually changes from time to time. Sometimes it's acknowledging, actually, same thing with the addictive person. Acknowledging addiction doesn't mean you don't do actions. It's not just saying, oh, I have an issue in my brain or my psychology, therefore I'm not going to do anything more. And it ebbs and flows as months and years go by. Some family members say that we did this system for 3 years and now we got to change some things now. That's actually kind of letting go of control, because you're offering new perspectives, you're adaptable, you're fluid to approach this problem.
We're speaking with Dean Theophilis. He is a mental health counselor, an addiction counselor as well, mental health therapist and addiction counselor. So honored that he's joining us this evening, and so happy that you're taking the time to be with us this evening on Live with the Louhs. We're speaking about addiction in the family. And if you or someone that you know is struggling with addiction, we invite you to call in if you have a question or a comment. We'd love to hear from you. Or if you're a family member that has maybe have had something that's really worked out really well when you dealt with this, we'd love to hear from you. I'm sure that many of the listeners would also as well. You can call us at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-237-2346, or email us a question during the live broadcast of our show at ask@ancientfaith.com. That's ask@ancientfaith.com. Dean, I just wanted to ask, for our listeners that are here tonight, so much of what you've been sharing has been sharing with us that every person who's struggling with an addiction is unique. And so every family obviously is going to be unique in the way in which they address that person. Some may be much more, that person may want to have much more of an engagement with the family, while others may not. But I'd love to hear, some support that those families can have. In other words, what are some ways that that someone who's tuning in tonight, who's doing a lot of what you're sharing with as well, but is needing a support team, needing a village to kind of walk them through this, where would you tell them to start at?
Yeah, definitely. Well, the first option that's been part of my work in life has been Al-Anon. A brief history of Al-Anon. So the original group that was founded in the 1930s in America, Alcoholics Anonymous, that was a support group for people with alcoholism, created a subgroup called Al-Anon, which was the wives originally, and then the family members of people with alcoholism. And Al-Anon, again, if you go to their website, if you Google them, they have groups across the nation. They're fellowships. There's no fees to join. You can come anytime, and they bring in so much help and resources, and can actually give you more options and avenues to help heal the family and help you on this journey of healing. The one for teenagers is called Alateen. This group was another option of AA to help the children of family members who have addiction issues. I also would add NAMI. This support group is for families and parents with children with mental health and addiction issues. Again, there's a national organization that is offered for across the country. Again, come in anytime. There's no fees. Again, there's a list of resources they provide. I'd always recommend, sometimes families come in and they say, well, what do I do for my loved one? Sometimes the response to them, you yourself go to therapy. There's a wonderful book called The Parallel Process, which again, I could send the link to that on Amazon. And it kind of emphasizes actually that outcomes for healing addiction, especially when children go into treatment, are actually improved when the parents do their own therapy. So that would mean, thinking about, attending weekly therapy, and again, having this parallel journey as your loved one's healing, the parents also healing too. And again, there's ideally if addiction gets so severe, the person does come into inpatient facilities, usually there are family programs provided by those inpatient, outpatient facilities that when the families go there, they provide ongoing resources. And then finally, when maybe the addiction's gotten better, there's somewhat more stability, I would recommend the families look at, family therapy, couples therapy,
Right.
that, that can
totally
sustain
agree.
health. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And how would you sort of bring the faith into the fight against addiction? What can strong faithfuls, do, obviously outside of AA and Al-Anon and these sort of wonderful, mental health organizations? What would you say as the person who is struggling in terms of their faith? Where does it come in?
Yeah. It's and actually I'm going to be talking about this at the upcoming O'Camper lecture. I look at the family's journey in healing as actually very ascetical, as very much a kind of what a monk or a nun would do out in the desert. I think about a lot. There's a quote by St. Anthony that he kind of asked God, like, God, why are all these things happening? Why are all these hardships occurring? Why are the bad prosper and the good fail? And God says, those are not your questions to know. It's your importance to focus on your own healing and growth. And so I would say for initial family members who kind of are in this first walk of dealing with the hardship addiction is that maybe the first step is kind of to go inward, to work on your own issues. And again, when I say working on your issues, it's not going to be like, look at all the bad things you've done and now you're going to be miserable and ashamed of yourself for the next several weeks, and then you'll feel better. It's more like, I got to keep growing. We are all at the mercy of God and his love and his grace and to help us understand ourselves. And so, maybe view this as a time of being like a mini ascetical practice, a mini Lent to go through, or maybe a larger Lent. To kind of go through and understand, how can I grow? This isn't easy. This will involve tears and pain, but again, we go back. Our faith is so amazing because it offers these. It understands what suffering means, the length of suffering at times, and we have so many beautiful examples of how Christ and how the saints, dealt with suffering. And again, I think to Scripture, I think right now I'm thinking about the lines of Paul in Corinthians. I'm thinking about love is patient, love is kind, love is long suffering. I mean, I've worked with groups and meetings where we just discuss those several words, that line, in our initial steps into dealing with addiction of the family, addiction of the loved one, and understand the joy, the strength that comes from those words and going inwardly as we're trying to help this person. And challenge ourselves in that growth.
I mean, I do think it's so rich, our faith, and I love what you're sharing too about even just reading the lives of the saints. Sometimes we sort of see them as this sort of abstract concept that's sort of out there, but we forget that they were actually just us, at one point, people.
Yeah.
And we're able to open their hearts in such spiritually rich ways that allowed, the beauty of the Holy Spirit to be in them and within them, in ways that teach us. And so I do think, for people struggling, and it's beautiful to go back and read, about the ways that they did that. And I mean, fasting, I've just read so much about, that there's power in fasting and what it does and what that may look like is different for everyone. But there is power to the body in fasting. And I think just such a richness of our faith. And Nick, you could probably speak on this more, but I do think there's a level with which we have to sort of open our hearts to it. And I think sometimes we close it, because we're so close to other people through defensiveness and not wanting to own it.
Right.
But opening our heart is sort of a first step, right?
Right. And I was thinking, I didn't, as you know, Roxanne, we've done many sermons dealing with addiction and the way that the church talks about them, and the Bible speaks a great deal about what we call strongholds. These areas of our life that literally are holding us back. They are keeping us. And I think it's so important that, obviously for us as a church and for clergy as well, to give messages, give lessons on this, at its very basic level, this is spiritual warfare, that we are in this battle, and all of us have an addiction problem. I mean, I think that by its very definition of the word, an addict is someone that is continuously doing things that are harmful, knowing that they're harmful, but they keep doing them. I mean, the reality is that we are all sinning. We continue to make mistakes. None of us is perfect. So in some ways, we all have that. And I love what you were sharing, Roxanne. I think it's so important that we have that self-awareness. That and when we don't have that lack of awareness, we can do what the enemy does and teaches us that you make excuses, you deny that it's a problem, you kind of hide, you do things in secrecy, and those kind of things. Unfortunately, if you don't have some sort of a way, whether it be the church, the sacraments, the theology of the church, or for that matter, a priest through confession, if you're not having that kind of come to, for lack of a better expression, come to Jesus moment, you just continue to kind of go on that path, and you underestimate the power and the stronghold, as we were mentioning, that has over your life. And so that's why for us, one of the reasons why we want to do this show is because not only are we hearing a lot of it, but we're in our practice and in the parish, but we've also heard a lot of it through our messages and retreats that people are like, please, Father Nick and Roxanne, can you give a show on this? And so that's why we're dedicating 2 shows, this show, and then 2 weeks from today, we'll do another show on addiction, so that we make sure that we try to answer as many of your questions. I know that we have is it a video call? I'm asking our producer right now to see if she can pull that up. We have a video caller.
I think a speak pipe question.
A speak pipe question, Matushka. She's going to work on that.
Sure.
Once she gets that, though, there was another question that came in
on food and addiction.
Yes.
Oh yeah. Yes.
And I think we could dedicate an entire show to that. I wanted to ask, in all 3 of your experiences, what role does good nutrition and supplementation play in healing both the body and the soul in addiction? I have seen many Orthodox fail in addiction while eating fast food every day, but conversely, I've seen many non-Christian friends who just look after their body and intensely have egos, etc., issues in their healing. How can we balance the body and soul's healing in a practical sense? And what a great question, what a big question for the last sort of 5 minutes of our show here. So, Dean, I'll let you sort of speak to that. Good nutrition, supplementation, what are some practical things we could be doing if we do struggle in our fallen bodies with addiction of any dimension?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, looking on the biological side of food addiction, food has an addictive quality. That affects our brain in many ways as drugs do. And sadly, there are foods, especially processed foods, that are designed to be addictive. And the sugar that we use has an addictive quality to it. There's a piece with food is that, it's also a very subtle addiction too, is that there's kind of 2 extreme ends. On the one end, there's this realizing that there's a addiction to sugar or processed foods or fats or caffeine. On the other hand, there's also the addiction of neglect, of abstaining too much. This is where we get into the worlds of eating disorders, of anorexia, of bulimia. My initial thoughts that I've seen when dealing with eating disorders and food addiction is that there's going to be a middle ground with this too, being aware of like, okay, what foods do we have to look at and examine that can be triggering, that actually can activate the brain, our neurochemistry to help fall into unhealthy patterns. On the reverse side, are we not following the things that actually destroy our own bodies, that we're depleting too much? Actually beautifully, there's a great treatment facilities. There's nutritionists designed with that in mind to know that like we have these 2 extreme ends of okay, how can we bring in healthy foods to our body, but we're not just abstaining to the severity where we're hurting our body in the process. That middle way, yeah.
I mean, I love that in food addiction you mentioned the other side of that, because so often that's often missed too. That sometimes abstaining too much in and of itself produces a third member in the family and something that, robs you of purpose and the sort of spiritual dimension of your life. And I do think that's, Nick, probably a show that we should,
Absolutely.
integrate,
I think that's
there's a lot to say there too.
I totally agree. Dean, we have just a few moments left in our show, and I do want to just encourage our listeners. If you're looking, as we shared at the top of the show, if you are looking for just a word of encouragement or just a word of guidance in your life, we do encourage you to go to our website, thelouhs.com/subscribe, and we just send out daily messages that we hope just inspire you, that give you some guidance, just to give you some just encouragement, knowing that Christ is the victor, as we were talking about earlier. And so I hope that you'll take advantage of that. Go to the website, thelouhs.com/subscribe. Put your email address in. Tomorrow morning at 7 a.m., you'll receive one of our daily words of encouragement. Towards the end of the show, I really wanted to kind of share an email that we got earlier, and that is, when trust has been broken in a relationship, when you're dealing with an addiction, someone has promised they were going to do something and then did not do it. And I'm sure that's something that you hear often, especially within families, is that, that has been broken. How do we go about, what would be some steps that you would tell a family member? How do they restore that trust with the family member that had that's struggling with the addiction?
Yeah. This question kind of, I think, hits back to this idea of the person versus the addictive behavior, and not going into our tendency to, with frustration and anguish that we have, going into harsh, like moralizing or attacking. When I've done treatment plans with families, they're kind of like behavioral contracts, especially with parents with kids. And there's a reality of that. When we form this contract, when the contract is broken, or there's been behaviors that kind of lose the trust that was formed in this contract we're trying to create, then there's consequences. And the consequences don't have to be heavy-handed. It doesn't have to be like, oh, this is the most horrific thing ever done in human history, but that it's serious. The response would be, I love this individual, but their addiction is again running over, is taking over. So when we kind of set those boundaries and we say, hey, there's been things I asked of you, there's been things that we worked together on, we agreed on, that you couldn't do. This is the consequence of that. I still love you. I still care about you. But I'm on top of the addiction, and the addiction's becoming, more invasive. So I had to set my own boundaries to make sure that we don't have the same pain again. And it doesn't mean we still let go of our own frustration and anger about this, but sometimes we have to be very very technical, not to get overly personalized with this. Yes, the emotions are still raw and they hurt, but when trust is broken that much, we know that we have to make sure we're keeping our own mind and body healthy, and setting those boundaries to say, hey, something as severe as like, you can't live here, or we can't engage right now until this is changed. So, my initial thought would be, setting that boundary, doing compassion, but some degree detaching all of our emotions to that event, to make sure that we're making sure the family is still working together in that addiction.
Yeah, I think that's so powerful. I would probably just add that, every situation obviously is very unique, but there's something special about when St. Paul says this in almost every one of his writings in the New Testament. He always talks about grace and truth. And there's grace, which is that compassion that we all need to have, that none of us are without sin. We all struggle. And as I think, Dean, you were saying that so beautifully earlier about the importance that, trying to separate this, the addict part of this person from your loved ones, and recognizing that, that one that has offended you is the addict, the actual disease itself, and separating that from the actual soul that is your loved ones.
Truth into that.
And you could speak truth, exactly right. So you have that grace and truth at the same time. So we've got other emails coming in.
We have other questions.
And other questions.
We're not going to be able to have time for the Speak 5 question either.
But we will definitely get to a follow-up. But Dean, there's about a minute left. The floor is yours. Please share with us any kind of last words of advice, encouragement. It's all yours.
Definitely. Thank you, Father. And thank you, Dr. Roxanne, again. My brief note would actually be the work I do at O'Camper. I wanted to mention that before we close today, is that our O'Camper conference, which is the Association for Mental Health Medical Professionals, Nurses, and Chaplains, is this coming October in the suburbs of Illinois. We have an amazing speaking group. We have His Eminence Metropolitan Nikolai as our keynote speaker of the Romanian Archdiocese. Just all these amazing workshops and speakers. Myself, I'm going to be speaking. We work closely with the Assembly of Bishops for the mental health professionals. And we also had this wonderful grant that actually keeps prices low this year. So this coming October in Illinois, if you can make it, that'd be great. It's an amazing organization that I love to support. And yeah, my last thought about the topic today is that if, again, addiction's vast, addiction is daunting, but there is hope. That, the beauty of just our faith and of Christ is that Christ sees us in our darkest hours, and we find the victory and we find the resurrection. And one of the reasons why I got into this field of treating addiction, because I knew that even though in this immense suffering, Christ was still there. So my thought would be is to close the day is that Christ is there in the suffering. He's there, and his love is present, and he will help guide you through and your family through these difficult times.
Thank you so much, Dean. That's so powerful for our listeners to hear. And again, you can find out more about Orthodox Christian Association of Medicine, Psychology, and Religion, ocamper.org. You can find out all about what they're doing, this amazing retreat that they do, and all the different speakers that are going to be there. We encourage you to support this ministry as well. So we want to just leave you with this final thought, everyone, and that is that, reach out to your parish priest, reach out to the people that are in your, that are part of your village, that are there to help you and to empower you. We brought on Dean, and God willing, in 2 weeks, we'll have another speaker on this topic. But I just encourage you, reach out. Do not journey by yourself. It's so powerful and important to have you connected to a village, a greater village that can help lift you and inspire you during those dark days. With that being said, we ask that you join us all next Tuesday for a brand new show of Live with the Louhs. We're going to be speaking with some dear friends of ours. The last name are the Knowltons. They're going to be talking about, they're very successful. They own a pharmaceutical company. They're going to be sharing, though, how they brought in their Christian principles and values into helping to run a very large company in this country, and we're going to hear all about it so that we can help empower all of us to use our platforms to make a difference in this world. We want to thank Matushka Trudy as always, for producing tonight's show. She does such an amazing job, and all the great people at Ancient Faith. God bless you, our friends, and please take care and stay strong in your walk of faith.
Father Nick and Dr. Roxanne are the authors of the book Renewing You, a priest, a psychologist, and a plan, which can be purchased at store.ancientfaith.com. Their daily inspirational messages can be found at thelouhs.com/subscribe. Be sure also to search for The Louhs on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Live with the Louhs is a listener-supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio.